every time that I smell diesel, it takes me back to pure muscle, pure power, ignited horsepower. I mean, that makes things move. And so being a transporter, nothing moves until something happens, and that diesel has to happen. That's the motto of the Army Transportation Corps.
A retired Army Sergeant Major recalls getting his troops and massive war machines ready to roll into Kuwait to track down and engage the forces of Saddam Hussein.
Fear is going to come, but you got to know how to use fear to your advantage. And when you're scared, your pucker factor is pretty tight.
And in a second story, he recalls the thrill and peril of riding the first powerful shockwave of American might across the Kuwaiti border into battle. Hello, welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a free writing program for veterans and their families in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation here in Richmond, Virginia. Our pair of stories today comes from retired Army Sergeant Major Eddie Camp. In 1991, Eddie led a massive armed military convoy into Kuwait. In these two pieces, Eddie tells us what it's like to ride an American army into Asia. Let's listen to Eddie's first story, The Rollout, performed by David Watkins. Then I'll sit down with Eddie Camp.
After a hot and dry day at the harbor yard, we made our way back to the warehouse. We were first to occupy the warehouse, so I let everyone spread out. Our space shrank quickly with the buildup of more units on the ground. When it was all said and done, we owned the middle of the warehouse. We used a wall made of duffel bags to separate living space. It was crowded, noisy, and hot, but it was home. Now with the truck topped off with fuel and soldiers fed, it was time for my 3 S's: shit, shave, and shower. Before I could get started, Truckmaster called me to his office in the MP motor pool. He informed me that all escort support had been diverted and I needed to grow my gun truck teams. He also told me that my unit would be reassigned to the 7th Group. I knew what that meant. Building forward support bases for following along units as we moved forward to the Iraqi border. The roads in Kuwait were dangerous for military convoys with a police escort and would only be worse without them. The local drivers didn't obey the traffic laws with police escorts now. It was only going to get worse. Oh, and the highways exit from both the left and the right. They only supported their rights of way. Over here, the highways felt like a derby races where the wins were identified by the most wrecked vehicles. After making my way back to warehouse, I briefed the squad leaders. We move out in the morning to Camp Patriot near the border, packed for 5 days. The loadout time is 0700 to 0900, start point 0230. Have the soldier in the MP 0500 for the convoy brief 0600 hours. We must be on station at 0630 ready for the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. After loading up, a bus will take us back to the warehouse until 0100. Now get some sleep. It's going to be a long day. Staff Sergeant Davis asked me about escort support up Route 1. I told him all escorts are diverted to other missions. We will assign a bobtail for recovery and soft-skin Humvee with a ring-mounted 50 cal as a gun truck. The night passed quickly, and by 0500 I was walking the MP line spot-checking progress. The soldiers were preparing their trucks, checking their chains and binders, loading their gear, quizzing each other over the rules of engagement. By 0545, all the trucks were in convoy order. As I gave the convoy brief at 0600, the sweet smell of diesel power filled the air. We said a prayer with Chaplain, and with one long blast of my trunk's air horn, everything would change from training to execution with no playback buttons. We arrived at the site safely, and the drivers wiped their heavy equipment transport systems side by side like a defensive line on the gridiron facing the sunrise. We parked the trucks 50 yards from the Marine Amphibious Combat Vehicle and Ash and Trash Vehicle. Every team jumped out to be the first ones ready. Specialist Robertson's team lowered landing legs, chock blocks, and had their ramps down first. Yes, we're ready. The gun truck was in place and soldiers fired up. We all yelled, "Nothing happens till something moves." I walked the line, checking soldiers and checking time. It was 0715. We weren't loading vehicles yet. Private Phillips, get HQ on the horn. HQ, this is Roadrunner 4, over, said Private Phillips. Roadrunner 4, this is HQ, go ahead. HQ, stand by for Roadrunner 7. HQ, this is Roadrunner 7. What's the ETA on the Marine drivers? We're standing by on site, over. Roadrunner 7, heavy traffic on Highway 1. Continue to stand by, said HQ. Roadrunner 7, acknowledge all, over. Soldiers were getting itchy. Staff Sergeant Davis asked, could we load the HCVs ourselves? We've driven their vehicles off the ship, so loading them ourselves would be easy and we could get back sooner. Having no escorts, a new gun crew, and a long trip, it wasn't worth adding unauthorized movement into the mix. Nope, that's not our job. They'll be here soon, stand by. They finally arrived, and now we could get busy. The drivers started their vehicles and moved them to the loading line. I could hear running engines, metal clinking, soldiers yelling. Everyone moved with speed and precision as they flowed back and forth across the trailers. They were loading and tying down everything by muscle memory. Soldiers jumped from trailer to trailer, helping one another. As I moved through the line, I heard over all the noise a ghostly yell coming from my rear. The sound rattled my eardrum. I ran toward the sound only to find soldiers everywhere, on the ground, on the trailer gooseneck, on the deck of the trailer, and walking back and forth with their heads in their hands. I walked to get closer. I wanted to be there. It was my promise to bring everyone back. Make a hole! Get out of my way! As I moved my way forward, questions rushed my mind. What happened? Was anyone hurt? Was I too late? Why was I on the opposite end of the line? Move! Get out of the way! It looked bad. The road grader was against the gooseneck of the trailer, and she was between them. Call dust off! Call dust off now! What are you waiting for? Get your ass moving! We moved the grader back slowly as we held her up, letting her know it was going to be okay, and dust off was on their way. Dust off arrived, and she was taken to the Level 3 hospital downtown Kuwait with her squad leader. The shock of her getting hurt rocked our platoon. The soldiers felt the weight not having a replay button. I called a quick pause of operations and huddled everyone around. We have a team member who got hurt and was airlifted to Level 3 for treatment. She'll be okay. Let's continue our mission and make her proud. I walked the line as the soldiers completed their tie-downs and mounted the trucks. The speed had changed. Faces seemed long, and nervousness flowed overhead. As I walked to my truck, Mark Twain's words hit me like a rock. The two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. I knew why I was here. It was my job to lead them through the pains that are coming and guide them to victory.
That was the Rollout, written by Eddie Camp, read always energetically by David Watkins. I'm joined here in the studio by Sergeant Major Eddie Camp. Eddie, the first thing I want to ask you in that story is this phrase. In the middle of it all, you said the sweet smell of diesel power was in the air. The sweet smell of diesel power. It wasn't just diesel smoke or diesel exhaust. You said the sweet smell of diesel power. That still resonate with you years later?
It does. Every time that I smell diesel, it takes me back to pure muscle, pure power, ignited horsepower. I mean, that makes things move. And so being a transporter, nothing moves until something happens, and that diesel has to happen.
Yeah, that's my next question, is that phrase, nothing happens till something moves. Is that a motto?
That is the motto. That's the motto of the Army Transportation Corps.
Walk me through it. Nothing happens till something moves. Was it General Forrest that said the Army that wins is that gets there the fastest with the mostest?
That is correct.
Yeah.
And so
it was Wellington that said an army marches on its stomach.
That's right. And so that includes beans and bullets. And so that's what transportation moves. Beans, bullets, and personnel. And you can't win a war without those. You can't do anything without those.
Right. Now, you at the time, you were an E7, you're a platoon sergeant. Now, this is in the days and weeks leading up to the invasion. You're in Kuwait. Yep. There's ships offshore. You're responsible for offloading those ships, getting all the stuff on land, so when the Marines land, their stuff's ready for them. Take me through the excitement of those pre-invasion moments.
Well, those pre-invasion moments were very hectic. It's because we had more ships and less people to offload them. And so, as you know, some units could not come forward because of logistics. And so that meant that anyone at that time who had a license as a transporter, and we can drive anything that has wheels, we learned how to drive things that has tracks. As a ground transporter, anything that had wheels on it, we could roll it. Had to go through the training to get license on it, and then we could offload it. So we offload all the pre-position stuff. But once we did that, it was still a matter of moving it from one spot to another. The anxiety comes in is when you don't have enough people to offload it fast enough because there's another ship waiting to be offloaded. And so that right there in itself had everybody on high alert. And then being in a country that they want you but not want you, puts you in a up and down kind of feeling.
What was that like being on the ground, the first troops on the ground, knowing that you're on the cusp of a war?
Well, I tell you, David, because I carry the responsibility of all 47 men and women, and we were just one platoon leaving out of my company. So the rest of the company didn't come yet. We were sent forward to offload the ships and fall in with the ground command. And so for that, I had to bring everyone out of my platoon plus a couple of extras in order to man me up to full fighting strength. I had young kids who had just turned 17, didn't turn 18 till we crossed, right before we crossed out of America's territory in the air. And so at that point, we had a party formed on the plane because now we were all legal to go into war. Because you can't go over there unless you're 18. And so knowing I have the responsibility of this young person, plus all the others, weighed heavy on my mind. And I knew that I had made within myself a promise. Bring everybody back, 10 toes, 10 fingers, and in the same condition. And so that weighed heavy. And so when we were the only ones on the ground at the port, when we had to drive through and deal with all the other people that were there who were not as friendly, it weighed heavy. But I was excited because I was doing what I was trained to do.
And tell me what happened to the young woman who got caught between the two vehicles and got dusted off.
What happened to her is that when we say ash and trash vehicles along with the amphibious vehicles, the ash and trash to us were the non-combat vehicles, which happen to be your graders, your engineer equipment. And so the engineer equipment, when the soldiers got on there, in order to move it, he put it in forward instead of reverse. And so as soon as he took his foot off the brake to give it a little gas to bag off the trailer, it didn't bag backwards. It lunged forward. And she was ground guiding it to move it forward. And so it chopped her. And when it pinched her, it really pinched her. I mean, she lost feeling in the legs. You could see that it was a tragedy. It was a tragedy.
How did it end up for her?
She had a recovery. Not everything was the same. And then she got discharged.
Okay.
She was medically discharged. And so that was the first casualty, the first incident that happened to us while we were there. And nothing had happened prior to that on ground of downloading the ships.
I know you. You're a broad-shouldered, caring man. You're the kind of cat that if I could have stood it in the military, I could have served under you. You'd have kept me straight, Eddie, or not. But you wouldn't have tolerated me one way or the other. But point is, how heartbreaking was that for you? If you can go back there, I mean, I know you would have traded places with her to spare her. What is that like to lose somebody so, I guess, just carelessly?
Well, it was a very dramatic event for me. I had not lived through anything like that before. So the weight of saying I would bring everybody back, 10 toes, 10 fingers, kept going through my mind. So I dealt with a lot of guilt, grief, regret, wondering why I wasn't there. I should have been there. If I was there, I could have said, hey, check, make sure that it's in reverse, a simple word. And so that played heavy on me, but I couldn't let that play on the soldiers because that would shut down operations. So I had to quickly think of what to do during that time.
You ended that story such a beautiful way. You said you knew your job was to bring everyone home. And you said not only guide them to victory, which of course is everyone's job. And once the military points itself, the point is victory, yeah? But to lead them through the pains. And you knew there'd be more.
That's correct. That's part of leading them. Part of leading them is to give them that encouragement, to make sure that they are part of the team. They have a buy-in in it, and emotions are real. But in that time, you have to take those emotions and put them where they need to be. Put the tension from the war itself, or from the feelings of tension, where they need to be. And what I mean by that, if you have a serpentine wheel on your vehicle, you have pulleys, and each one of those pulleys demand a certain amount of attention at a certain time. And your job as that leader is to make sure that the tension is in the right spot at the right time. And so it's directing the tension to where it's most effective. And that's what I tried to do as that leader at that moment of bringing them in.
That's a fascinating look at leadership, Eddie. Haven't heard it put like that before. To compare it to the good, clean, efficient operation of a big machine. That's the way I would expect you to put it. A man who invaded Asia with a bunch of trucks. Now, Eddie's second story, Crossing the Berm, again read by the gifted David Watkins. Afterward, I'll talk with Eddie Camp about invading Kuwait.
Pre-combat checks and pre-combat inspections were completed. I had conducted headspace and timing drills with each gunner 3 times, checked ammo counts, conducted commo checks with frequency hops, and conducted a map recon. Second Lieutenant Miller and I had conducted the convoy brief, and Chaplain Weil had prayed over us. As I conducted some last-minute battle drills with the platoon, Private Jones asked, "What's going to happen when we cross the border?" I told him and the other soldiers that as we move across the Kuwait desert, things would start slow. We'd roll out by serials. As we get closer, every nerve in your body will be on hyperdrive. You'll be able to hear your heartbeat, feel the blood flowing through your body, and your pucker factor will be tighter than it's ever been. Soldiers, that is when I want you to trust your training. Trust your weapon. Trust yourselves. Trust your battle buddies. Trust your leaders, and know that we are ready. Now return to your trucks, stand by for the call forward, and make peace with your God as I have made peace with my God. We are the best army in the world, and we will be victorious. On the way back to my truck, I could smell the power of diesel and hundreds of soldiers ready to go. As I climbed in, I stopped to pick up a red, white, and blue bandana that was lying on the camp floor. It had the 91st Psalm printed on top of the American flag. Brother Davis, from my church back home, had given it to me in remembrance of his mother's gift to him when he deployed to Vietnam. He challenged me to memorize it while in Iraq and watch it work in my life. Squeezing into my seat between the movement tracking system and radios, I caught the moonlight as it caused a shadow of military power on the desert floor. Yes, we were ready. We were the logistical support team for the world's most powerful tank division, the 1st Cavalry Division. In my serial of 19 heavy equipment transport systems, I had 2 HMMWV gun trucks with 50 caliber machine guns, 16 40-foot containers, and 2 Bradley tanks. I was surrounded by men and women ready to die for our nation and her causes. The call forward came over the radio faster than I had anticipated. I gave the signal hanging out the door of my truck to mount up. We were moving, marched our steel dragons northward to Baghdad. In the midnight air as we crossed the border into Iraq, fast movers buzzed overhead, delivering hell rain on our enemies, clearing the way. To my west, the rolling thunder of 1st Cavalry Division placing still on target, releasing balls of light into the night air. We rolled on. I could see from my MTS the massive waves of blue icons moving across the desert as the red icons disappeared. I told my driver, keep your eyes on the red cat eyes of the trailer in front of you. Remember your training. Scan left. I got your right side. You're doing great. As we crossed the checkpoint 1, LT called up, open CP1. When I crossed CP1 as the rear truck on the convoy, I closed out with CP1 closed. We had 4 CPs before our refuel on the move at CP5. A lot could happen between here and there. We had to stay alert, stay focused, locked and loaded. I sent a message over the MTS. Keep each other awake and alert. We crossed CP4 as golden sun rays peeked over the dunes, exposing for the first time the mighty force of our coalition. The Iraqi tanks destroyed with pop turrets, holes through their hulls and having tracks blown throughout the desert roads. In villages, homes demolished from a failed attempt by Iraqi tanks trying to use them to shield themselves. I made a radio call and sent out an MTS message to all vehicles. Stay focused. Keep your eyes open and your head on a swivel. Remember your training. It seemed that all hostilities had stopped as we continued the movement to CP5. We were running low on fuel. The ROM would be right on time. The ROM was about 5 minutes out. We could see the line forming with tanks, trucks, and soldiers ready to top their vehicles off. We made it. Each truck worked its way through the line. I told my driver, let me out to ground guide you through the line. As I walked and looked around, I could see the marshalling area had iced down water, coffee, and MREs. Once we made it to the marshalling area, I met up with LT to review the route to our release point. We reviewed the paper map and locked it into the MTS. She said, WTF, Platoon Sergeant, did you see those tanks and homes back there? I said, Roger, ma'am, that was the hand of God working in our favor. We could have been in the middle of it with our soft-skinned vehicles if we didn't hit our CPs on time. You're doing a great job. We need to make our RP before nightfall. Go ahead, eat some chow, ma'am. I'll check the soldiers on our way back to my truck. The soldiers were in good spirits and ready to reach the RP, offload, and rest under the comfort of being at the logistical support area. Once I reached my truck, I gave the hand signal to mount up and we rolled out. The convoy moved very quickly with little to no sight of the enemy. The high-con frequency on the radio was quiet and my MTS screen was clear. I knew we were on the right course. When did the next serial leave? Why couldn't I see their icon? Who's at the LSA? Okay, now I see some icons. I said over the radio, attention all stations. We're approaching the RP, stay alert. We have to pass through this town first. Moving through the town, we passed abandoned homes, obliterated tanks, and a bullet-riddled white van with bodies hanging out the windows. The town had been cleared. We moved forward 10 more miles to RP. At the release point, LT called the convoy to a halt. We immediately formed a herringbone defense position. I moved my truck to the center, told the gun trucks to take up the 0 and 180-degree positions. I pulled the LT's truck backward into the center with me and had the Bradley gunners mount the small guns for the 45 and 95-degree positions. I said, LT, we're in the right location. I can see friendly movement all around here. Report to HQ we are in place and will set up a hasty position. They'll return here once they have completed their main effort. I'll move the trucks into a wagon wheel and make camp. I told Staff Sergeant Davis, lead the trucks into the wagon wheel formation. I moved the LT and my Humvee into the center of the wagon wheel. I had the Bradleys offloaded and positioned where they could provide 360-degree coverage for our small guns. I moved our standby 50 cal into a tripod and placed it in position for suppressed fire. We had 10 pair of night vision goggles in the platoon to share. Night had fallen and we were in place. Everyone was on high alert. Sleep was a distant memory. The night sky lit up. We could see shapes moving in the distance. We were not sure if they were getting larger or smaller. I yelled, hold your fire! One of the soldiers yelled, incoming, incoming, incoming! I saw a whitetail and knew it was outbound. I looked at the hasty position to find a butt in the air facing the enemy. I yelled, it's our guys giving it to them! Our boys are back! Let's set up a 50-50 guard shifts and get some rest.
That was David Watkins holding nothing back, reading Crossing the Berm by Eddie Camp, who's sitting across from me here in the studio in Richmond, Virginia. Eddie, let's talk about Kuwait, the invasion, Saddam, and pucker factor. So you said to your men, as we get closer, pucker factor is going to increase beyond what you ever imagined. Trust your training. I want to know, since this was your first combat, how did you know all that?
Well, at that time, I had been in the Army for 10 years. And so I had old guys, old veterans, older platoon sergeants. And when I joined the war, it was in the Cold War. So my first assignment was in Germany. And this was before the Berlin Wall came down. And so they would tell me stories, and they'll tell me about the way things can be. And we stayed on high alert. I mean, our job was to go push back the other side of Germany if this was to happen. And so I lived in this time where the unknown is there, but you got to be ready. And fear is going to come, but you got to know how to use fear to your advantage. And when you're scared, your pucker factor is pretty tight, and you're on high alert. And so that's what I was letting them know, that I understand how you're going to feel, but you can work through it.
And you understood that because other veterans had gifted you with their wisdom.
That's correct.
And I'm sure that you did the same following these deployments. And when you had young soldiers who had never been in the shit before, you prepared them the way you were prepared.
That's what we did.
That's lovely to think. Okay, hit me, 91st Psalm.
All right. So the 91st Psalm, and I'm not going to go over the whole point of it, but I'm going to hit the high points because these are the things you need to know about that Psalm. One, things are going to happen to your left and to your right. Darts are going to come. Bullets are going to fly. People are going to die. But God, for those who know the Lord, He is going to be with you always. And you can count on Him as your shield and your protector. And He'll cover you in His wings. And He'll make sure that those things you just see and not experience because of His protection. And that's what I walk with daily. Not just from that deployment, but from the deployments after that, and that confidence.
Beautiful, Eddie. Thank you for sharing that. All right, this is for me personally. I've never made a hand gesture and had 36 diesel vehicles power up. In that story, crossing the berm, you gave the hand signal and everything went boom. And you said, in addition to all this, as you called in the first story, the sweet smell of diesel power, you said you were surrounded by men and women ready to die for their country. And there you are, Eddie Camp, little kid from what, Texas?
That's right, Dallas, Texas.
Nobody, right? And there you are, surrounded by all this power and all this might and all these, not just young men and women willing to get into a scrap or willing to go out and do push-ups and calisthenics and run 3 miles. No, you said ready to die. And there you are in the middle. Can you cast yourself back to that and tell me what that's like to be that guy surrounded by that power and that commitment?
That is like being wrapped in a blanket as a child, a swaddling wrap. Because when you look out and the way the sun hit at that point, at night, everybody's just lined up. There's tons and tons of darkness and light and headlights, well, little glimmers of light as everybody pulled in close. But when you get a chance to look at the formation of all this power, all these vehicles, in each vehicle you had 2 to 6 people, and all of them knew that this could be the last day. And we all accepted that responsibility because our nation asked us to do it. And we were doing it for the men and women to your left and right. So as we trained for each other to be able to fulfill our part of the pie.
Listening to your descriptions, of course, it cast me back to D-Day. And it cast me to all the island hopping the Marines did, the amphibiousness, and the 9th Air Force over Berlin, and these great armadas. You can see them in a macro sense, but it all does boil down to that one young man, one young woman, the 91st Psalm, and that moment, right? Even if you're part of 10,000 ships and planes, it does boil down to the individual soldier and that soldier's faith in 2 things: the man or woman next to him and their willingness to live and die for their country. Their faith in God, their faith in their country, and their faith in their training, and their faith in the men and women next to them. Which takes me to your description of the desolation of Saddam's army on that first sunrise. And you described it beautifully in that story, Eddie, but you called it the hand of God. Seriously? Is he on the side of the Americans?
God is on the side of righteousness. And sometimes that can be on America's side. Sometimes that can be on another force. But on that day, he was with us. America has a lot of flaws. But God cares for everybody, not just Americans. So on that day, God was on our side. Some days, you asking yourself, where is God? Because of all the things that are going on. But then you have to realize that it rains on both the good and the bad. And some days he allows things to happen to bring us to his end state. And you say, well, what is that end state? To draw us all closer to him.
But on some days, you didn't feel God.
Some days you didn't. Some days you wondered, where are you? When you see dead bodies, or you see the pain, or you're feeling lonely, or you're feeling sad, you're feeling like you lost everybody. And you say, God, where are you? Where are you today? Where are you? And you wrestle with that. And then you'll see something that says, I'm still here.
As are we, Eddie.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Eddie. The Mighty Pen Project is a free writing program for military veterans and their families, offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Pen or just send us your thoughts, email us at mppodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. If you're a veteran or a family member of a serviceman or woman listening to this podcast anywhere in America, and you want to learn how to best tell your own powerful stories, you can sign up for one of our Mighty Pen writing workshops on Zoom. If you want to read today's pieces and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Music for this episode was provided by Jackson Albrecht. Lastly, if you'd like to support the Mighty Pen's efforts to record and preserve these stories of service, adventure, and sacrifice, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen Podcast. It's an honor